Hello, you're watching World Report. I'm Jash Hirani. The US-Israel war has reached a stalemate, and as Islamabad prepares for a second round of talks, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. Neither Washington nor Tehran has truly emerged on top. The US, still struggling to define what victory even looks like, is now shifting its focus to the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, a sign of how uncertain its objectives have become. Iran, despite projecting defiance against American military power, has little to show beyond symbolic gains, and according to experts and analysts, it could lose even those gains if a deal is struck in Islamabad. But amid this deadlock, one player is quietly and significantly advancing its position, and that's Israel. As diplomacy unfolds, Israel has pushed itself nearly 10 kilometers into southern Lebanon, pursuing a clear and calculated objective to carve out a buffer zone and neutralize the threat from Hezbollah. And if this conflict drags on, Israel may well be the only side that truly stands to gain. This had become a major point of friction during the initial ceasefire discussions. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif had tweeted that a ceasefire had been agreed upon between the US and Iran, adding that it would apply immediately everywhere, including Lebanon and elsewhere. However, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu refused to halt the operations and continued military strikes in southern Lebanon. Iran strongly objected, arguing that the ceasefire must apply to Lebanon. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance maintained that Lebanon was not covered under the initial ceasefire framework. Eventually, as pressure mounted from Iran, and with continued diplomatic insistence from Pakistan, a separate ceasefire for Lebanon was announced. This episode clearly indicates how determined Netanyahu is to pursue Israel's objectives of creating a buffer in the southern Lebanon region. So, what exactly is happening on the ground? South of the 145-kilometer Litani River in Lebanon, Israel is attempting to create a buffer zone to insulate its northern settlements from attacks by Hezbollah, one of Iran's key proxies. To achieve this, Israeli forces are expected to deploy deeper into southern Lebanon, dismantle Hezbollah infrastructure, and prevent displaced residents from returning, effectively creating a buffer stretching up to the Litani River. The Israeli military has reportedly termed this line as the Yellow Line. Reports suggest that this objective is pursued by destroying civilian infrastructure, including bridges and critical water systems, making the area uninhabitable and preventing resettlement. The humanitarian cost has been severe. Since the beginning of the conflict this March, at least 1,238 people have been killed in Lebanon, including 124 children, according to the Lebanese Health Ministry. On the Israeli side, 10 soldiers and 2 civilians have been killed, according to official figures. Additionally, 52 health workers have lost their lives. The IDF also stated that it has killed 2 journalists, claiming they were terrorists. More than 1 million people have been displaced. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz has stated, at the end of the operation, the IDF will establish itself in the security zone inside Lebanon on a defensive line against anti-tank missiles and will maintain security control over the entire area up to the Litani. In addition, the return of more than 6 lakh residents of southern Lebanon who evacuated northward will be completely prohibited south of the Litani until the safety and security of the northern residents are ensured. All houses in the villages near the border in Lebanon will be destroyed, according to the model of Rafah and Beit Hanun in Gaza, to remove once and for all the threats near the border to northern residents. The Israeli army has also instructed civilians in southern Lebanon to evacuate and move north of the Litani. Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich went even further, stating, the Litani must be our new border with the state of Lebanon. Let's now understand this concept of the Yellow Line. The term was first used during the Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza in October 2025. There, the Yellow Line divided the Gaza Strip into 2 parts. territory under direct Israeli control and the Palestinian controlled areas. It was also referenced in the draft framework of the Gaza peace plan proposed by US President Donald Trump. Initially conceived as a temporary military deployment line for disarmament operations, the Yellow Line has increasingly become a structural feature of Israel's defense strategy. Following the October 7 attacks, this approach evolved into a forward defense doctrine aimed at preventing militant groups like Hamas and Hezbollah from regaining operational capabilities near Israeli borders. According to research group T Politography, nearly 58% of Gaza is currently under direct or open-ended Israeli military control under this framework. Another term often used interchangeably is the Gaza model. Hardliners in Israel have advocated applying this model to southern Lebanon. Proposers of this defense policy demand what we discussed earlier, that is, flattening of civilian infrastructure, which will lead to mass displacement of local population, which will first create a temporary buffer, later to be converted into a permanent one, gradually, and later converting it into a militarized de facto border. The only thing the Israeli state has to do is to ensure that the civilians don't return back. This policy has been criticized heavily at home by the Israeli citizens and many prominent people from the Israeli civil society, military strategists and economic experts. Their primary argument is that this yellow line buffer zone is becoming more of a strategic liability and less of a defensive asset. Retired IDF officers have warned that fixed military positions make soldiers vulnerable to guerrilla tactics, sniper fire and anti-tank guided missiles. This is not the first time Israel has attempted such a strategy. While Israel is currently creating a buffer zone south of the Litani, it had launched a similar operation in 1978 known as Operation Litani. Let's understand the reason behind it. On March 9, 1978, 11 terrorists belonging to the Fatah al-Islam group from South Lebanon, an area that Israel occupies today, infiltrated Israel and hijacked a bus traveling along the coastal road near Tel Aviv. The terrorists killed 35 Israelis, including 12 children. The attack had been carefully planned at a time when Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin was scheduled to visit the United States to advance peace talks with Egypt, following Egyptian President Anwar Sadat's historic visit to the Israeli Knesset in Jerusalem. Sadat had initially been a staunch adversary of Israel, having fought the Yom Kippur War to reclaim the Sinai Peninsula, which Egypt had lost to Israel in 1967. However, he later softened his stance, recognized Israel and signed the Egypt-Israel Peace Treaty, making Egypt the first Arab state to formally recognize Israel. In return, Israel returned the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt. Coming back to the terror attack, one Fatah leader post the terrorist attack confirmed that this attack was to destabilize the Israeli-Egyptian peace process. The attempt to foil the peace plan failed as Begin postponed his US visit and a treaty was signed between Israel and Egypt, one which I mentioned above. Following this attack, the Israeli Defense Forces launched Operation Litani with the aim of pushing Palestinian Liberation Organization north of the Litani River and creating a buffer zone which, like Israel seeks to establish today. According to Israeli estimates, around 4,000 militants were based in that area at that time. Israel once again invaded Lebanon in the year 1982 under Likud party's Prime Minister Menachem Begin's leadership. Remember, Israel's current Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also belongs to the same Likud party. Israel's primary aim to invade Lebanon was to remove Palestinian Liberation Organization from Lebanon, remove Syrian influence from the area, and form a pro-Israeli government in Lebanon. The PLO, however, continued to occupy the region of southern Lebanon after the Islamic Revolution took place in the year 1979, which helped the creation of Hezbollah in 1982. Since then, Israel has been fighting the Shia-based militant group, the Hezbollah, who was successful in driving out Israel out of the southern Lebanon in the year 2000. There is another territory that Israel has secured to fulfill its strategic security needs on the Western Front, a territory that originally belonged to Syria, the Golan Heights, a rocky plateau on southwestern Syria, the Golan Heights, lies about 60 kilometers south of Damascus. It is bordered by the Yarmouk River in the south and the Sea of Galilee in the west. Israel captured this territory during the Six-Day War in 1967 and currently controls around 1200 square kilometers of its western part. Today, there are approximately 30 Israeli settlements in the region with around 25,000 Jewish Israelis living there. Most of the Syrian Arab inhabitants fled during the conflict. However, about 20,000 Syrians, mostly Druze Arabs, remained. From the top of the Golan Heights, the Syrian capital Damascus is clearly visible, giving Israel a significant strategic vantage point to monitor Syrian movements. Syria attempted to retake the region in 1973 but suffered heavy losses. An armistice was signed in 1974 and a United Nations observer force was deployed in the region the same year. Just as Egypt regained the Sinai Peninsula after signing the peace treaty with Israel under President Anwar Sadat, Syria under the Assad regime had also shown interest in similar arrangement in exchange for the Golan Heights. However, Israeli public opinion has largely opposed withdrawing from the Golan Heights, citing its critical strategic importance. In 2019, US President Donald Trump officially recognized Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. Syria criticized the move as a blatant attack on its sovereignty. So to conclude, what we are witnessing today is not just another military operation. It is a pattern taking shape in real time from Gaza to southern Lebanon, and historically in the Golan Heights, Israel's strategy is no longer confined to immediate retaliation. It is increasingly defined by territorial buffers, forward defense lines, and long-term militarized security zones. The yellow line is no longer just a tactical response to a threat. It is fast becoming a doctrine that begins as a temporary control, then hardens into a prolonged presence, and eventually risks turning into a permanent reality on the ground. And that is where the larger question begins to emerge. Because history shows us, buffer zones rarely remain buffers. They evolve, they expand, and over time they redefine borders without formal declarations. So as the guns continue to fire and diplomacy struggles to keep pace, the world must ask itself, is this purely about security? Or are we witnessing the quite calculated reshaping of geography, a slow, strategic redrawing of borders in the name of something far bigger? That's all for today's World Report. Till I see you next time, that's next Saturday at 8 p.m. Thanks for watching.